Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Fireside CharLA. Before we begin tonight's program, we're excited to share that all of our events are available in Spanish via Zoom's real-time translation feature. To share more about how this works, I'd like to introduce you to our Spanish language interpreter, Alejandra Marroquin. Alejandra.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone tonight. As Richard said, my name is Alejandra Marroquin, and I will be your interpreter tonight along with Leah. And what we want to be able to share with you is the basic concept and idea of what language justice is. And language justice is the belief that everyone has the right to speak, to hear, to be understood in the language that they feel most comfortable in. What we're doing right now is consecutive interpretation, but shortly we will start our simultaneous interpretation. And we also want to remind people that creating a bilingual space is the shared responsibility of everyone. Hopefully one day we can be multilingual, but right now we're going to be bilingual, English and Spanish. And if at any time you see a gesture from Richard, your host, to slow down or to speak up, please be on the lookout for that as well. Also, if at any moment in time you have any issues with your technology, please alert someone. Don't suffer in silence. Your IT person will be Victor. Shortly, you will also notice that in Spanish, we will be using the F form versus the A or the O. This is not an error, it's intentional. It's our effort to break through gender binaries. Thank you. Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Me llamo Alejandra Marroquin y hoy voy a ser su intérprete tanto con mi compañera Lea. Y queremos introducirles la idea de justicia de lenguaje, y eso es la idea de que todos tienen el derecho de hablar, escuchar y ser entendidos en el idioma en el cual se sienten más cómodos. Lo que estamos haciendo ahorita es interpretación consecutiva, pero en un momento vamos a ir a interpretación simultánea. También queremos recordar de que la creación de un espacio bilingüe es la responsabilidad compartida de todos. Entonces, por favor, miren a su anfitrión, Richard, que si en un momento hace el gesto de que eleva la voz o por favor hable un poco más despacio, él le va a indicar esos gestos. También no sufra en silencio si tiene problemas con la tecnología. Victor va a ser su persona de apoyo de tecnología. Y también como están escuchando, ahorita estamos usando el fórmula E versus A o O. Esto es intencional, no es un error, es nuestro esfuerzo de quebrar los binarios de género. Gracias, y con eso se lo paso a Richard.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, for your expertise and your team's service. We appreciate you. Jake, if you could please go ahead and activate the translation function now. And a note to our speakers, again, if you see me make this gesture, please slow down and so the translators can keep up. For those of you who have your video on, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a small globe. It says interpretation. You press that now, you will be able to hear Alejandra translate in Spanish. Damas y caballeros, tenemos traducción en español disponible para este programa. Por favor, seleccione español en el menú debajo. Gracias. Tonight's Fireside CharLA is brought to you in partnership with United Latinx Fund and Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. This online event series aims to engage, educate, and advocate on important and timely topics that impact LA's Latinx community during the COVID-19 pandemic and also during the current moment of civil unrest. My name is Richard Corral, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of United Latinx Fund. I'd like to quickly thank the sponsors for tonight's event, Southern California Gas Company and JP Morgan Chase, for their commitment to and investment in nonprofits like United Latinx Fund that work to transform, uplift, and improve our community's quality of life. Our program is designed to engage you, our audience. So if you have any questions, please enter your questions in the chat box, and note that everybody's audio and video will be muted until the Q&A. Also, tonight's program is streaming on Facebook Live. So to access the video, please visit the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles' Facebook page. A link will be provided in the chat box, and please host a watch party and invite your friends. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the Latino Coalition's Facebook page. And I don't think that the Facebook Live has been activated yet, but as soon as it does, I will pull it up and I will demonstrate very quickly how to activate a watch party. Jake, if you could get that going, that would be great so we can have others join us in tonight's conversation. As you all know and are excited like I am, tonight's conversation centers on Black-Brown justice and coalition building. While tonight's guests are all men, we want to acknowledge that, of course, women have played a central role in advancing social justice, civil rights, as well as on the CharLA series. Tonight's discussion centers on wrongful incarceration, police brutality that has a tendency to disproportionately impact minorities and specifically men of color. Our panelists have all worked diligently to change policy and repair broken systems that significantly affect our Black and Brown communities. I'd like to introduce my co-moderator for this evening, Superior Court Judge for Los Angeles County, Rupert A. Birdsong, as well as our esteemed guests, Alex Sanchez, Executive Director of Homies Unidos, Skip Townsend, Executive Director of Second Call, Christian Contreras, Justice X Attorney, Stephen King, Justice X Attorney. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna pass it off to my co-moderators, Judge Birdsong, to kick off the first question. Judge.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I'm very, very happy to be here. We are in absolutely unprecedented times where people are speaking up and not being quiet about seeing this injustice. With the camcorder and with the smartphone, these types of things which have happened in the communities of color happened for many, many years. And people thought with Rodney King being caught on video and then having a trial that things would change. But of course, if everybody remembers that summer of 1992, when those officers were acquitted, and when Latasha Harlins, who was shot in the back of her head by a woman in a store and only got 6 months of probation, that's when this city erupted. And fast forward to 2020, and so we see George Floyd, who was killed in the streets. But that seemed to have woken up everybody with regard to, enough is enough. And we're seeing changes all over the world. We're seeing even our courts who are acknowledging that these are problems. Almost half of the states in this country, about 23 states, including California, have issued statements condemning racism and wanting to have justice for everyone. So one thing that I'm doing in my little world, I'm co-chairing a task force on the elimination of bias and inequality. And so my charge is to work with the judges throughout the state to make sure that they have effective training, make sure that they are checking their biases at the door, making sure that their decisions are not based by any implicit biases with regard to sentencing, with regard to how they treat the litigants, with regard to how they treat the attorneys of color. These are the things that are changing. Just this Monday, our Supreme Court came down with a decision which awarded damages to an African American who was killed at the hand of law enforcement. What was unprecedented is that there was an acknowledgement of the mistreatment of people of color, and in particular Blacks, in this country. And that absolutely is a big, big plus in showing the level of awareness that we're facing. So we're really grateful for the mindset that is coming about. So to kick that off, our first discussion question that I want to put out there for the panelists: discuss your work to advance Black and Brown justice and coalition building, particularly during this COVID pandemic and the current national protest.
Well, I'll kick it off. Hey everyone, my name is Christian Contreras. I am an attorney with Justice X. Justice X is a coalition of Black and Brown lawyers advancing Black and Brown interests and the interests of marginalized communities and populations. We're building coalitions through our actual coalition. Justice X is led by 2 Black lawyers, 2 Latino lawyers, My name is Christian. I am the Latino lawyer. Humberto Guizar, who is my mentor and one of the senior lawyers, is Latino as well. And he asked me to send my regards to Judge Birdsong. And we also have Austin Dove, who is another leader in our community and as well in our coalition. And then we have Stephen King, who is also a panelist here. So just our own organization and the connections that we have with the community is just in and of itself a form of coalition building. And I'll have Mr. King touch on that more.
Well, thank you, Christian. I'm one of the co-founders of Justice X. For me, what really started out the day before the George Floyd death, essentially my colleague and myself got together and essentially recognized that we had over 60 lives that have been taken at the hands of law enforcement. Meaning when you do this type of work, it really weighs on your heart. So we went on Facebook, just like we're doing here today, and had about 10,000 attendees, and we read off the names and said something personal about those individuals. And for me, Justice X really mentioned who was the next life that was going to die at the hands of law enforcement and what was going to happen as a result. And lo and behold, it was George Floyd. And that really sent not only the nation into a spiral, but it also sent our desire to help and to make a difference. And we decided that the Black and Brown communities should come together, form an alliance, and show that what we can do collectively to be part of the answer, so that the way that the community and the police community actually looks at us, they can't divide us, and we can come together as one common voice. So we've done a lot of things for the homelessness. We formed an organization called the Protesters Defense Alliance, and we had over 150 lawyers that volunteered their times to represent protesters who were arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights under the First Amendment, and if there are violations under the Fourth Amendment or 14th Amendment. So essentially, we sought within ourselves to answer the call, and I think the timing was right, and I think we're doing everything that every one of us here wants to do. And because we're lawyers, sometimes, maybe we're listened to a little bit more, or sometimes a little less. And I really appreciate what Judge Birdsong had said, because sometimes judges need to look at some sort of bias within themselves. Are they sentencing a Black or Latino lawyer too severely as opposed to a Black or Latino person who's being charged with a crime too severely as opposed to someone who's white? Is there disproportionality in sentencing and how we treat each other? And then even the lawyers sometimes. I've walked into a court where sometimes they think maybe I'm the defendant because I'm Black. And so we're trying to change the narrative, and we're trying to have some sort of responsibility and accountability and have equal application of the law. And that's what we're doing with Justice X.
Right, and we're doing a ton of other things, and we have a large number of initiatives that we could touch on later, but I'll have Alex or Skip touch on this topic as well before I delve into that. So go ahead, Alex or Skip.
I'll go ahead and start and say that for the coalition that we formed here in Los Angeles and South LA, myself and Alex, it is the Black and Brown Alliance for Justice. And it was primarily because now is the time, as we spoke on already, the George Floyd, but also because of the senseless violence against the street vendors that was going on in South LA. There for a minute in Compton, Long Beach, even in South LA, there's been a number of different incidents that were filmed. So there was a lot of work that went into actually addressing that. And what happens in social media is because people aren't privileged to be a part of the meetings or know what the structure, the process is, they assume nothing's being done. So we formed an alliance to actually show people that we're working together, that the Black and Brown Alliance for Justice is working together, not just to help the street vendors, but to help anyone who is in need during these times of COVID-19. So we pass out, along with food, weekly, we pass out different hygiene, whether it's the mask for people, whether it's the hand sanitizers, whatever we can to help individuals. And we keep documenting it, that the Black and Brown are working together. So there's a lot of things that go on under the table where people don't see. But what we want to do is bring everything we can and show that to light and let people know that we're working together and that there has not been an incident that has happened in the city of LA that we haven't addressed in a way that we want to reduce violence. We want to reduce detention. We want to work directly with those who would be violent offenders. And we bring them to the table and get them to help us as well. And we go into the communities, we go into the neighborhoods, we're on the street corners with them. So that's some of the things that we've been doing here recently.
I'll follow Skip. I think that's important to really also understand that this is not something new for us. I've been working with Skip for over 20 years almost already, you know, under our mentor, Bo Taylor, you know, that really was the guide in regards of working in his own neighborhoods with the African American, but also reaching out to me and saying, we got to work with Latinos. And he was the one that really helped me see that we can't just do it alone. We need to work ahead and address the issues of our community together. Working in division has always been a failure because it's all about egos, right? So we felt that it was important to reach out to Skip and say, you know what, Skip, this is happening around our community. Tensions are building up behind these videos that are happening. We have to reach out and start looking at the issues that relate to us and impact us in the work that we do. So around the issues of police brutality, we started addressing the issues of how our young men and women are being stigmatized by labels and through the criminal justice system, including courts, where our young men, especially who are being labeled as gang members, get the short end of the stick, meaning that these are individuals that are being kidnapped and beaten and brutalized in alleys and then let go. And the gang members are looking at it's something that's common that happens because they're gang members, right? So just the stigma of somebody being labeled a gang member, a gang member, you're supposed to accept, right? The issues that happen to you behind police brutality, right? If you say I was framed or this was planted on me, or I'm not a gang member, you know, it's you against the word of the police officer. So we're addressing the issues of how deep police brutality happens to this specific population. In order to do so, we've been working alongside Skip and other brothers and sisters in the community to reach out and start organizing around the Black and Brown Alliance for Justice to address these issues. We're going to be also joining some of the rallies with Black Lives Matter, but we're also going to be doing our own in regards to the issues that we're addressing. So it's critical that we understand that this is not something that's new. This is not something that people are barely understanding that we need to unite. It's a calling that has been happening for decades.
You know, hundreds of years, Alex. I appreciate that. Hundreds of years. And in fact, when we look back at history, when we look at our original documents, the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, it was never Supreme Court justices saying that those documents were not intended and never intended to include people of color. And we're still battling that narrative, which said, basically codified systemic racism and discrimination, that there were no laws in the Dred Scott case, Roger Taney, no laws on the books that a white man was bound to respect, that it was as sure as the sun is hot that Black people, and I'm going to include our brown brothers in that category, are inferior and white people are superior. That was the narrative that was placed in our legal documents, which have gone forward even to this day. That is the false narrative we are continuing to battle, that we have to continue to overcome. Me as a judge, if I don't have a robe or a gavel in my hand, I have to overcome it, because when they see me, they see a Black person who might be dangerous, who might be lazy, who could not be somebody in power or authority, but something less than automatically, until I have to prove that I have done something. So this is This is embedded in our documents. This is embedded in the DNA of this country, and we have to keep chipping away to change that narrative. To that point, I'm going to ask the panelists, what is your vision to reimagine public safety in terms of this interaction between law enforcement and our communities?
Well, public safety needs to be reimagined in terms of making it community-based. And I think there is already a movement towards that. We're seeing the defunding of police and the reinvesting of those funds into programs that actually help people. It doesn't make sense to send a police officer to a domestic disturbance. It doesn't make sense to send a police officer to someone who is having a mental breakdown. My private practice entails litigating cases against municipalities and individual officers for civil rights violations, aside from Justice X. So in a lot of our cases, what we see is we have mentally ill individuals who may be having a bad day, and they're approached by officers with guns abrasively, aggressively, and the natural consequence to that is, of course, a response that is going to be at the same level. So when we see officers who shoot first and ask questions later, that's a flaw. When we see officers who have multiple shootings, that's a flaw. And when we see officers who aren't reprimanded, that's a flaw. And we need the system to be transparent. It's difficult for the police to police themselves. Just today, we saw that finally the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department announced that they're taking action against 26 deputies who were involved in deputy gangs. We have this current case, which I can't disclose that much information because of protective orders. And that's another issue. The public can't get information, but we have this one case where there's allegations that the deputies are in deputy gangs. And how is the Sheriff's Department allowing this to happen? You can't allow a subgroup who have tattoos and are commended and are promoted after each shooting. So we need to reshape how we think about policing, and we need to reshape who we allow officers, who we allow people to become officers. We can't allow people who are trigger happy and potentially have PTSD to police people because it's against the interests of the community. So we really need to reimagine that and prioritize community policing.
I couldn't agree with you more, Christian. And it really goes down to the fact that, I mean, a lot of us in our own communities were traumatized. And, you know, our first inclination is to run, or we're not being treated fairly, which is true. We need to make the community feel cared for. We need to make the community feel safe. We need to allocate our resources in the community that's there to rebuild, whether we have single family homes, whether we have mental illness. We need to take our resources into the community, and I'll submit to you, but it needs to be individuals like us that do that. The Black and Browns, you know, coming down, taking our coats off and going into the communities and saying, look, we care. We're going to make a change. We're going to have reform. You do have a voice. Things are going to change. It's going to be different for communities to come. Yeah, we can do that through legislation and breaking that down and letting them know what that is, what that looks like. We can do that through cases. Me as a civil rights lawyer, I know that every civil rights case that I fight, and like Christian was saying, sometimes we get a case and then it's subject to a protective order. We get all this negative information on an officer and we have to, we can't say anything about it. So I really like to push the envelope and take it all the way to trial. I've had a trial in federal court that lasted 7 weeks long, but you know what? It changed policies. And one thing about it is we actually subpoenaed a judge to testify in our case. And the judge testified that for 6 years, he acknowledged that this was going on and he told his agency to stop doing it and they didn't do it. So sometimes you do have to push the envelope, and that's where it comes in for lawyers to say, let's go toe to toe and let's see what it takes. And of course, the county or governmental agencies, they have endless resources. So that means they're going to appeal, they're going to tie up your money, they're going to try to play you cheap. Well, you know, for me, I come from a position where, you know, I didn't have much to begin with. So, you know, I don't need much to live on. I'm just going to fight this fight. And if there's some sort of reward at the end, I'm just going to reinvest it in my community. And so that's what I do. So I think for me, reimagining means getting reconnected with what got us here in the first place, the hurt, the trauma, showing our community we care, going down to the schools, dealing with education, dealing with mental health issues, dealing with housing issues, and showing everybody how it works from the bottom to the top, having everybody have a voice, and really let's start treating ourselves as human beings again.
Yeah, thank you.
You know,
Sometimes
it's basic humanity.
that's it, Steve. But sometimes it's really just some common sense. When I was a brand new judge and I was down in the traffic court, and so I had this case where an officer had pulled over this man for not having his headlights on as he's pulling out of a 7-Eleven. And so I'm looking at the citation, and I'm looking at the man. He was about in his late 60s. I mean, he was kind of unsure, like, why was he down here at this courthouse? And so we called the case. I asked the officer, I said, why are we here? He said, well, we had somebody who broke the law. I said, stop, wait a minute, hold on. But why are we actually here? I want you to consider this. So you're doing your job, and you make this observation that this man pulled out of the 7-Eleven and didn't have his light on. And so you stopped him. And then when you stopped him and engaged him, you saw, one, that he was an older guy. He was not a criminal. He was not having his lights off to advance some type of criminal activity. So at that point in time, when you made that assessment, did you consider to just tell the man, you know, you need to have your lights on at night because it's not safe to drive without the lights on? Could you do that and have a nice day? And he looked at me like, and I said, did you consider that would give you credibility in that community? Because one, you have enforced the law. You told him to turn his light on, but at the same time, you haven't tied up his day, your day, or my docket to deal with something that really is not advancing what that policy is supposed to do. So we have to individually, sometimes when we see these moments, to point it out and just think. I love that what you said, Stephen, about human values, about humanity here. And we know the difference between those people who would want to cause harm and they should feel the full brunt of the criminal justice system versus others who just maybe in the wrong place at the wrong time and didn't have that bad intent, but it was somehow escalated because you're not looking at a person as a human. And that's what we all have to work on. We all have to work on that. And then that's from the officers in the field to the people in the prosecuting agencies and all the way up to people in my position.
I have a commentary about that because right now I'm getting a phone call from individuals who live in the Baldwin Village area. They live in the jungles. And there's a young man whose whole family is deeply embedded in the gang lifestyle. And he grew up in that area. However, he's a United States postal worker. And just last week, he was pulled over by the police and he was handcuffed, and they said that they believed that he was a suspect in a crime that had happened a couple of weeks ago. But the thing is, they all look alike. You know, when we come from a community of Black and brown, I'm just going to give you some fictitious names. That there's Richard and Raymond, and Raymond might be crazy Ray Ray and carry a gun, but Richard goes to school and plays ball. But they came from the same home. They come from the same street. They go to the same schools. And it's difficult to see which one is, you know, and as you put it, Judge, you know, when the police officer pulled the guy over, you could clearly see he's not a criminal. Well, what they see with Richard and Raymond are they see criminals. Even though Ray Ray might be crazy Ray Ray and have a gun, but Richard isn't. But when they look alike, what happens is a lot of taxpayer dollars, a lot of the criminal justice system is spent with guys like Richard who are wrongfully convicted. And because they come from these areas, they're lumped into a category. And I would really like to talk about training that can be done, Black and brown. You know, there are some guys that I know who are of Latino or Chicano descent, have tattoos all over their face. And for me, I know that it's a scared tactic. It's because I want to make everybody afraid and don't talk to me because I really want to be in a shell and be left alone. It's not because they're criminals and they're murderers, but they look like some of the hardest guys ever. And I know it's just out of fear or a cover up of drug tracks or things of that nature. So I just want to add that in real quick, that everyone in the community is not a gang member and every gang member is not a killer. So we have to work on that really good. Have to keep working on it.
Thank you, Skip. I appreciate that. And I want to make sure that we continue with today's conversation because we have.
I would like to add that that we would like to envision a world, a city that's free from police terror, that our youngsters in our communities could walk out, play ball in the street and parks and not have to fear every time a law enforcement officer comes by. We envision that that people have due process if arrested, where they're not framed, where they're not convicted just on the basis of what a police officer said, but that a due process that's just, that doesn't have the corruption and continuous systematic oppression that exists right now in the criminal justice system, where our men and women are not held in solitary confinement, completely destroying their mind, but in a world where they could come out and heal, a place that they could go and learn and heal and come out better to do well in our communities. That's what we want. We want to envision where, you know, we could be working next to a law enforcement officer that's just, that's there from the community and doing things for the community. Not that they're afraid of us, right? That we see them every time they come, where they're arresting someone or just scoping us out to see who to give a ticket to, you know, harassing us every time that they see us in the block, right? And racially profiling us like they do, right? A world where they don't have to be any labels of a gang member, a wetback, or a legal alien, right? A gay, where we all consider equals, right? Where law enforcement has respect for the community and our youth and our people in those communities. That's what I envision, right? That's what I strive for every day in the work that I do.
And I love how you sort of, everybody's really outlined their vision in terms of what they think public safety should really look like. But also, let's get real and let's talk about what's really happening and the actions that each of you are taking today in order to hold law enforcement accountable. I'm familiar with all of you and the work that you're doing, and I really want everyone online to appreciate the specific actions that you're taking to hold law enforcement accountable. Let's start with Christian.
Well, immediately, as I've explained, my private practice entails suing police departments, municipalities, and individual officers. So liability through civil actions is one form of holding these officers accountable. And also, you know, we need to tear down qualified immunity. I just submitted a brief in the Ninth Circuit a couple of weeks ago arguing for the dismantling of qualified immunity. I think it's absurd. We saw that the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, right? That was after 4 years of a civil war. The 13th Amendment finally abolished slavery with the exception of a conviction of a crime. So legally, slavery still exists, and we see that in the incarceration of Black and brown people. But after that, in 1871, we saw that Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1871. And what that was a protection for Black people against the tyranny of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. And throughout the years, Black people and minorities have used the Civil Rights Act as a shield against tyranny and a shield against the violation of their rights as guaranteed by the Constitution. Around the 1950s, the Supreme Court created qualified immunity. And what that is, it shields police officers from civil liability when they violate the rights of people. And throughout the years, it's gone to an egregious level where officers can just get away with killing people. And we see that happening in our cases regularly. So we need to tear down qualified immunity to hold these officers accountable. And we also need to keep the pressure up. We're seeing the protesters that sprang out of the George Floyd killing actually create traction. The voice of the people matters. I think the power is in the people. So the more we protest, the more we voice our concerns is another way in which we're going to hold police officers accountable. And one of the initiatives of Justice X that we're pursuing is a class action against the city of Los Angeles and Chief Moore because of the misclassification of hundreds, if not thousands, of Black and brown individuals as gang members or gang associates. As Alex was discussing, this is a complete violation of due process. We're seeing people categorized and classified as gang members, and they're not even convicted of a crime. This is worse than being a sex offender. At least sex offenders are convicted of a crime and then they register with a database, but with people in the community, they're labeled as gang members, classified as gang members, and it taints the rest of their lives without due process, without a conviction of a crime. So we need to actually push back. We need to actually give the voice to the people, and people like me, lawyers, and people who can actually use the legal system need to continue connecting with the people on the ground level and work together to effectuate actual change and maintain that dialogue and continue building coalitions.
Yeah, I echo exactly what Christian is saying, and also Brother Skip. When you have the Richard and the Ray Ray, right? Because sometimes maybe you pick up Ray Ray, he's not with Richard, and he has no problems. He just happens to be in the community. And now all of a sudden, the officers at their discretion can fill out an FI card, a field identification card, and say, well, I saw Ray Ray and he said he goes by, Ray Dog, and, he's from this stat or whatever it is they want to put. They put that on a field identification card, and then they keep it in their database. And not only that, they put it in sort of a whole Cal Gang database. And now, not only is the individual traumatized by, man, I can't go anywhere and do anything without getting harassed by law enforcement, but now it's really as if now they're targeted. They've been branded as either a gang member or somebody who hangs with gang members or somebody who works in association with a gang. And just that little card really turns their whole lives upside down. In this class action, we have a brother who was on his way to college. He was a high school collegiate athlete. And this one occurrence, deterred him. Not only did he have to face criminal conviction, he was lucky enough where his family was able to hire one of the co-founders of Justice X, Austin Dub, who vigorously defended him in a murder trial. And literally imagine you're in a murder trial, a police officer gets up there and says, that's the man who shot at me. It's like, you're crapping your pants. And so something that we have to do is, we have to be the voice of the voiceless. We have to really understand how this is affecting our communities. And we have to vigorously hold the officers to the letter of the law. What was the probable cause? Fortunately, some agencies have body cameras. And, we all have to just follow the rules, be respectful, get the best representation that we can, wait. Hopefully we have a fair and open-minded judge who will look at these things. I've had judges like Judge Birdsong. I haven't been before Judge Birdsong. I've known him when he was practicing law, but I've known judges that have just looked over at the district, at the cop and said, are you for reals? Don't ever bring that hogwash into my court, and literally have kicked them out of the courtroom. And so we have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe in the integrity of justice. We have to believe that there is a way to change. And we could do it in a nonviolent way, but we have to be very aggressive. We have to stand up for what we believe in, and we need hard litigators like Christian. Look, he's a young lawyer, just barely out the gates, and this man is going to be somebody to reckon with. And so if we continue to lead the path, we're going to have more Christians, and we're going to make a change. So to everybody's point, they are doing that. They're labeling us, depending on what neighborhood you're in, what car you're driving, what's going on. But, that's their prerogative. They think they have the upper hand, but we got to use the tools of the law to hold them accountable if they refuse to accept responsibility.
So real quick, I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate everything you just said. Let me turn this down, seems like I have an echo. But let me share real quick that we are suffering in our community not from PTSD, which is normally described as post-traumatic stress disorder. What I have seen in our community is present stress, present traumatic stress disorder, meaning that there is a fear for my life. There's a fear for my children's life. when we go into the community on a daily. So if I had told you I was in a domestic violence relationship and I felt for my life, I felt for my children, I'm sure everyone on this call would say, well, Skip, you need to get out that relationship. And that is a relationship that we have with the LA County Sheriff right now. That is the relationship that we have in our communities, where it is a violent, not only am I physically intimidated, I'm mentally and emotionally intimidated. So I don't get to get over this. We need healing in our communities, Black and brown. So you know what happens when, I've learned this by the misfortunes I've had going in and out of LA County Jail, that when there is no one else to trip on and we're in a cell, what we do is we turn around and trip on each other. Whether it's black on black, whether it's black on brown, or the two dogs I got in my backyard, you know, when there's no one else for them to fight and chase, they fight and chase each other. But we are suffering from conditions that started, yes, back in slavery, but we have never properly healed. If I broke my leg, you can see how I walk and say, Skip, your leg didn't heal properly. But when it's inside of me and you can't see it, how do you know that I'm not healing properly? You won't know until I show up in front of a judge and the judge is sitting there like, well, why would you do something like that? Why are you acting like that? And then we criminalize our actions, but I've never healed. So I just want to share that with you guys. I mean, I don't want to make a left turn in this, but just know that the community needs to heal.
You're right. Why are you angry? Why are you so hurt, right? And a lot of times anger is an expression.
I also...
But
so I also wanted to just add that that in the work that we do with Homies Unidos, we get young men primarily, but young ladies that are fantasizing with the notion of being in a gang, right? Because the gang becomes just an option of several options in that neighborhood, right? They could be drug addicts, you know, they could be drug dealers, they could be prostitutes, they could commit suicide, right? All of those issues are just different choices in the block that they're growing up. Gangs is just one more choice, right? But the other things are being looked a little different when the gang is being looked as a certain criminal act in which it's a personal choice. And the problem is that, you know, when the young man or women decides to join the gang, it's when they have given up on life, right? So to speak, they have committed suicide, right? So for us, when we get our young men and women involved in our programs, we instilled that they use that energy and the skills learned in the neighborhood to use them for something positive. So we're exposing them to advocacy. We have taken them to Sacramento so they can learn and work on, like Proposition 47 and Proposition 57. Right now, we're going to be working against Proposition 20, which they want to change and put a dent on those propositions that would work into dismantle the criminal justice system in the way that sentencing have been worked, you know, juveniles have been treated. Now with Prop 20, they want to dismantle the work that we've done for so long, right? So we need to engage our youngsters into this. We get folks coming out of prison, right, that are also getting involved through our reentry program. And it's difficult now to even get them housing. It's just difficult. And if you don't have something tangible for them within a week, they know how to get money. They're going to go back to those dumb streets. But the fact is that's why we want to defund, you know, a lot of this oppressive machines that have been created to keep us enslaved in the criminal justice system, right? The CDCR, probation, sheriff, LAPD, school police, funding, unnecessary funding. I see an incident in the street and there's like 50 police, 5 police cars. You know, it was like, how is our money being spent, right? So I think that when the funding, it doesn't mean that we say that we don't want no police, but that we want the same dedication that you want to oppress us, to heal us, to bring resources to us so we can help these youngsters be able to change the way that they've been dealing with their own life, right? Like Skip says, to start healing, because that's the process that they don't go through. And the recidivism, you know, Judge, that you see him coming back and back and back into the courtroom because there's nowhere to place them. And it's difficult, you know, when they're hungry. You can't tell them be good when they're hungry. You can't tell them be good when they're going back to an abusive home. You know, you can't tell them be good if they don't have a job, right? So it becomes really difficult to help. So I think that it's important that that with the Black and Brown Alliance for Justice, we're going to be addressing many of the other things that that we have not addressed, right? In regards to police accountability, not only in regards of how they take young men and take them into alleys and beat them up, or pick up young men that are gang involved and dropping them off in certain neighborhoods. If you look at it, many of the young men expect that to happen because they say, oh man, I'm a gang member. That happens to me. That happens to us all the time. So the reality is that that's kidnapping and attempted murder. Police are kidnapping our young men and taking them and dropping off in different neighborhoods so they could die and be killed. And they know that they're disarmed because they take any weapons away from them to defend themselves. So we got to look at that. We got to start looking at that. We're also working with cases in which I know personally that officers have lied and under oath, have forced women to testify against their relatives, have threatened them that they'll turn them over to immigration or take their kids away. You know, these are things that our community goes through every damn day. I got this kid that was convicted over false witnesses that an officer, a gang unit officer, found and forced to testify against this kid. This kid's been beaten up, being harassed. He's in a PCR because he can't function anymore. It's been down for almost 20 years. And the cop is still lying under oath. He perjured himself in my case when he tried to take me down in 2009. This is the type of cops that are not accountable, right? So if you have an officer that have been already perjuring himself in several other cases, why is he still being used as a gang expert? Right? And we see this on and on and on. Not only are LAPD officers doing cases locally, but they're being used to go to Central America and train officers on gang tactics. Like El Salvador, they have the inter-exchange program. And these are cops that over here have terrorized our communities, and they're down there teaching other law enforcement officers to do the same, right? The broken windows theory. You know, that's been implemented in Central America. What do you think? There's so many Central American kids fleeing Central America. It's because the police is also being worse than the gangs themselves.
So Alex,
you know, I work with unaccompanied minors, so we see this every day.
Alex, if you could just give me 1 second, because I do have a question for you specifically around, and everybody else around, next steps, right? You've clearly articulated the problem. I'm going to give each of you 1 minute, and please do keep it to 1 minute. If you could just tell me very quickly, how do you think that nonprofits can advance your vision around either Black-Brown justice, public safety, coalition building? Christian, you're part of a nonprofit. What do you think?
Right. Well, we have several different initiatives. The first one is education. We plan on having a legal boot camp for 50 middle schoolers or high schoolers to teach them about the law, make connections with them, with lawyers like us who are Black and Brown. And that's one way to help. We also are helping with homeless individuals. Justice X is working with the Latino Coalition in Los Angeles to address homelessness in Los Angeles County, which disproportionately affects Black and Brown people. Around 75% of homeless individuals are Black and Brown. So nonprofits like ours, Justice X, PDA, and Latino Coalition in Los Angeles need to build partnerships to work on these initiatives, and initiatives like police reform and accountability are also things that we need to do. And that's just by connecting with the community and building partnerships.
Thank you, Christian. Stephen, nonprofits? Let's get you unmuted.
Okay, you were saying next steps.
Regarding specifically, how can nonprofits help to advance your vision and the proposals you outlined today?
Right. Well, I think also getting involved in legislation. You know, we're talking about defunding the police, right? We're really talking about reallocation of resources. So where are these resources going? You know, is it mental health? Is it homelessness? And for me, the next step is having a black and brown face and having a seat at the table. And where are these funds going? Is the allocation going to be appropriately made? Is it going to be disproportionately made? And really making sure that we're taking care of our own communities. So I think not only from a political aspect, but also from a street level, we need to go in the street. I call it giving up their Justice X cards, you know, so if they have a need, if they have a concern, what is it that they need in the community? So it's education, it's mental health, it's having a presence, and it's working all the way up to having a seat at the table. So when these monies that are being allocated are saying, oh, we're giving $10 million to the homeless, it's like, okay, well, why is it disproportionately allocated? And then letting the media know, letting the world know, letting the community know, because now they feel a part of it. It's like, oh, look, you know, those brothers are actually out there having a voice for us. So then the trauma, then we start the healing. Somebody has a voice, somebody does care, some things are on its way. You know, community policing maybe, having, look, you know, and I had an idea, and it may not have been a first idea, but you get a Hispanic officer and you hook them up with a young African-American male, and they actually share their stories and really build some sort of connection. And whether we put it on social media or whatever, and then we go and slowly start to infiltrate into our communities that this matters.
Thank you, Stephen. Skip, same question. Obviously, you work for a nonprofit. How are nonprofits essential to advancing the vision that you outlined today?
Well, I think it's very important that we understand that as we work with the children, the young people that are in the community, as we change their mindset, their behavior, their attitude, what happens is it's like taking a bath and putting on the same dirty clothes, because we're putting them back in an environment that doesn't support the change. So as much as I work with a person from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, when I take them back to the same house that might not support the change, when I take them back to the same neighborhood, the same block, and then they have to deal with it. So now they have to figure it out. But then not only that, we never change the perception that society has on our children that come from the Black and brown community. It's sort of, to me, like we're setting them up for failure. So I think what we have right here, which is a wide array of different backgrounds and different lines of work, collaboration is the answer. We cannot, and I think that Alex said it that when he first introduced himself, that at some point he learned that he can't do it himself. No, it takes a collaboration to change the people we work with, but also change the community, the environment, but change the perception that people have on, these are our children. Our children hurt our children. Our children, even LAPD, we are hiring from the human race. You know, some of them are hurt. They've been hurt. They grew up without a father, not knowing who their father was, or might have been abusive homes or whatever. And now we put them in charge of police in our community. So we have to spend more time collaborating.
I appreciate that, Skip, and that's really what we're trying to do. Latino Coalition of Los Angeles.
I think that
is really trying to build collaborations. Skip, I mean, Alex, if you could take lead us out with 1 minute into the Q&A. Alex, same question. Thank you.
So, I mean, I have a nonprofit that we've been around for 20 years, and we feel that we have some good programs available. And we've partnered with folks such as All of Us or None up in Oakland. I'm one of the founding members, but we also are part of different coalitions, right? But sometimes nonprofit organizations, they're just going after the money, and we got to call it like it is. You know, they're looking for the next new thing to go after, and the thing is that you need to look at organizations that have been around, continuing to do the same type of work, and they are the ones that need to be provided those necessary funds that they need. Sometimes you have organizations that just pop up during the time of crisis, and they have good grant writers and whatnot, and they forget the community as soon as those funds end. So we need to start just looking at other folks that could do the work, and not create another nonprofit, but actually enhance those that are continuing to do the work they've done for a long time.
Judge,
I want to make sure that some of this messaging is not misinterpreted. When people are talking about criminal justice reform and police reform, that's reform for the things that are bad. I would give prosecutors fits what I oversaw a misdemeanor trial calendar, and I'm addressing the jury in terms of getting them ready for their role to decide a case. And I would tell them, nobody likes a bad cop. And they were like, oh. I said, wait a minute, think about what I said. I didn't say we're going to just dislike cops, because there are officers, there are sheriffs who are putting their lives on the line and doing an incredible work. I've represented some of those people. What we want to deal with when we say defund the police, we're talking about defunding the things which are negative in the communities. Nobody is saying take the police off the streets and everybody just fend for themselves. And I hate when people try to repackage that message to think that that's what that means. It means that for the bad apples, for the people who are not doing what they're supposed to do, for the people who are abusing their power, those are the ones that need to be removed. Those are the ones that need to be held accountable from the top down, because the good cops don't like the bad cops either, because that's making them look bad. And we haven't talked about the psychology, and this is what I observed when I was representing the sheriff's department. My law firm represented the sheriff's department for many years. I think they still do. Here's the psychology that we haven't talked about, but it's real, and something needs to be done to examine this. When you're out there on the street and you are relying on this person to watch your back, to literally protect your life in terms of if something goes and puts you in harm's way, and then you turn around and make a mistake, be it intentional or accidental, and now that person that you relied upon, you're gonna rat them out after they've been there to save your life. Think about that psychology. That's almost like in a family situation where you have a brother that you grow up with and that brother's done something wrong. Are you gonna turn your brother in? That's something that needs to be addressed, because if you don't overcome that, you're going to have this resistance to say, hey, man, you're not supposed to be doing that. No, you're going to cover for me. We have to get beyond that, where we have zero tolerance for cutting corners and violating the oath that they took to protect. When you have zero tolerance and know that there are going to be absolute consequences, then we're going to start to see some change.
That's right. That's right.
It's not anti-police, it's anti-police brutality. Let's make sure we're clear on that. Nobody's saying get rid of the police. Nobody is saying that.
I'm saying that.
The thing about this, it's important to clarify, Christian, is that we want to make sure that we are not only on the same page in terms of what needs to be done, but also in terms of the language that we're using. And I think that a lot of the questions that are coming through the chat box are really about two things. One, defining what needs to be done, and being clear about it, but then also being supportive. And so right now, our team is inviting everybody in to the conversation. And I'm going to ask for Cindy, who's the board president of the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. Cindy, if you could give us two very high-level summary questions that we can, in about 5 minutes per question, because we are running over time. So Cindy, take it away. Cindy, can you unmute yourself, please? Okay. I'm not going to pass this over to Raul. Raul, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you could facilitate today's Q&A. Thank you, Raul.
Sure. So it's good to see all you brothers. Thank you for the work that you guys continue to do. Specifically, recently, there's been a call after much protesting, marching, risking our lives out there during a pandemic for systemic change. There was a doubling down on a very Band-Aid type of program in many of our eyes, which is the CSP program. What are your thoughts about the doubling down of, again, a cop-initiated program to raise our kids, to keep us safe, instead of investing more resources like life insurance to interventionists like you, Skip, and Alex, and helping you create the next generation of crisis interventionists? So can you talk a little bit about, this true meaning of reimagining public safety and getting away from being so dependent on law enforcement and more on community interventionists like yourselves?
Yeah, so I believe, well, you got to turn yours down. But I truly believe that one of the things that happens is the CSP program is designed to build the relationship in the community. So I really don't have a problem with CSP. The problem I have with CSP is that they get to claim the results of the work of interventionists. So I think every police officer should be a CSP officer. They should be assigned to a location. They shouldn't move every 18 months. They should learn the community or whatever. That way they can respond and have knowledge of the people they're dealing with. But what has happened and what I saw in the Jordan Down projects years ago when they first brought the CSP in is they built the relationships based on the interventionists. The interventionists who were making less than $30,000 a year, while a probationer at LAPD was coming on about $56,000, and I'm sure those numbers have gone up now. But what happens is once they built the relationships, now they have backpack giveaways. They have Santa Claus driving in a car, passing out stuff, and what happens is they get to claim that they saved the community. But what they've done is they've actually just exited away from the relationship they had with intervention. They start the Bears, which is now the Rams. They started the football team, and they have police officers coaching. We have very good coaches that come out the Nickerson Gardens, the Jordan Downs, and Imperial Courts. So they're not empowering the community. What they're doing is taking from the community, when I believe it was meant to empower the community through relationship. But for me, I want to say it's the narcissism society that the police have, that they have to be the ones to come from wherever they come from, San Dimas, Diamond Bar, or wherever in Orange County, to save our community. And that's not the case. We have people here who can save ourselves, who can help if we have the same resources. I believe that the attorney spoke about the county and the state having unlimited resources. Imagine if we had unlimited resources and the things that we could do if we had the $1.8 billion that LAPD has. So, that puzzles me too, as the crime has been coming down. Definitely the murders have come down from what I knew about the 1990s and 1980s. So the homicides are under 300 in the city per year, but they still have more police officers and they have a larger budget. So when, let's just say, me and Alex are responsible for reducing the homicides, they have more money left for CSP and they can double down, like you said, on CSP. But why not pay the individuals who are out here? And 80% of the work that we do, we're not paid for it. We don't get paid for it. I just found out today that Alex is paying $104 to get the food that we've been giving away. I'm sitting here telling people we've been giving away free food. It's not free. Alex pays for it. That doesn't make sense to me, that that the budget is so high. But as interventionists, 80% of what we do, buying boots and stuff and things for children, we pay out of our own pocket. It's just, they say it's no money for it, no budget, but the budget is there. So I agree with Judge Birdsong that we're not defunding the police, but let's defund some of the things that they do that does not belong in their hands. It belongs in our hands.
Right. And CSP, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's Community Safety Partnership Program. And I think the fact that that program even exists is ridiculous. This should just come innately. This should be part of just the standard police practices. Why should there be a program for police officers to be about the community, to make connections with the community? This should be part of your job. Every officer in California goes through POST. What that is police officer standards and training. There's 42 learning domains. In those 42 learning domains, there should be more emphasis on community policing, fostering relationships organically, and connecting with the community. The fact that there's a thin blue line, the fact that there's a code of silence is ridiculous. I think that makes every cop bad. I'm not saying cops are naturally bad, but the fact that they stick up for bad cops makes the entire system bad. So we need the cops, the police officers, to hold each other accountable and be trained to make connections naturally, not create a program that adds bureaucracy, adds costs, and allows the budget to be ran up just for the police officers to do something that they should be doing at the outset.
Thank you for that, Christian and Skip. And so with that, Richard, I know that we had a question from Milton. Milton, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Is Milton still with us? Okay. Not hearing back from Milton. Alex, is there anything that you would like to add to that same question before we go to our final question?
I think that's important to understand that in the line of work that we do, we're taking many risks. Today we went into just for saying that we went in with some youth that I work with from the MS-13 gang, and we went into a rival gang, which is Playboy's gang. And these are kids that are still trying to figure out what to do with their lives. So they can literally just go toe to toe. But because I'm developing relationships with the director of Resilient, which is this other organization, we were able to have these kids together, spreading love by distributing food together to the community. Right? We already got some youngsters that are going to come over to my neighborhood. They're going to be in neighborhood. They're going to be able to serve food. We see you coming to the neighborhood and delivering food in my block. And they say, well, why haven't you ever come over and talk to me? You know, it's your neighborhood, right? And this time they said, okay, we're going to go over there. And they say, yeah, you're going to serve food to your families, right? This is the type of work, but we're not wearing vests. We're not armed, right? We're going into these communities knowing that its sole purpose is so your word is valuable in these neighborhoods. If you don't keep a promise, you lost your credibility in that block, right? But to maintain that credibility, we cannot associate ourselves with law enforcement and tell them what the hell we're doing in the street, because we lose credibility. And in the GRID program, you know, there's a lot of stuff, the gang reduction and youth development, although it's a good project that hires a lot of guys, the reality is that it has a lot of things that are not right, you know? Yeah. And we need to fix those things.
Alex, we got to close out. We're over time. I'm sorry, but I do want to give the judge 1 minute and 1 minute only to close out, because we actually have to use this line for another meeting. So, Judge, the floor is yours.
Okay, so my personal charge to everyone is to not be silent, have courage. What I try to do is I am encouraging our people to go into law enforcement, so you understand what it means to deal with your communities, to make sure that what you see that you don't like, you can be a part of that solution. I'm encouraging our people to become prosecutors, so that when they see this case, they can see it from the lens of compassion and understanding that some things should not be prosecuted, that there should be some type of diversion or some other type of intervention that doesn't deal with putting them in the system. I'm encouraging our people to become judges so that they can be in a position to make a difference, to have that compassion, and to make sure that people are not just thrown into the system. And finally, how we deal with this through the legal system, you have to put in the right people in the legislature. That means what? You need to vote. You need to know who these people are who are running for office and who are going to adopt the type and pass the types of laws that are going to protect your community. So make sure you vote. Don't take yourself out of that process. And don't ignore your jury summons. When Stephen and Christian are in there trying to put on their case and they have somebody that needs to understand what's going on, and you decide, well, I'm not going to go to any jury and I'm just going to just let it happen, then you have no one to blame when the verdicts come out bad because people like you don't understand what's going on. So stop avoiding jury service. Serve when you can. There's another whole panel that I'd be love to talk about next time on that issue on jury selection and that process. But anyway, we're so glad that everybody was here this evening. We wish everyone well. Stay safe. We are still in the middle of a COVID pandemic. So do what you need to do to protect yourself and your families, and God bless everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. And we'll see you next week. We're going to talk about something even equally as important, the census, and some emergency strategies that are being implemented actually by some of the folks here on the line who are doing some important work around food programming and food pantries. And we'll be in contact with those folks on the line today to be inviting you to participate next week to talk about the census, emergency strategies for vulnerable populations and hard to reach folks. See you next week, Thursday. Thank you. Have a blessed day.